If the past couple of years have taught us anything, it is that here in the United States, nobody's safe. If you didn't personally get COVID, then I bet you were at least impacted financially. You could have probably had your place of employment shut down temporarily. And if you did, how did that feel? Did you have some money saved up to help you really weather that storm? In most cases, nobody did. Nobody had that financial security, that cushion. But some people do now. Now, I bring this up as to why nobody's safe and what does this mean? Well, I want to talk to you about this. Right now, there's 154 million Americans that are at risk. But why? Well, here's the reason why. Here in the United States, there's roughly 164 million people that are currently employed. Out of those 164 million people, there are only 6% of those people that are self-employed, which comes out to about 9.9 million people. This means there's 154.1 million people that are at risk of layoffs, being fired, being screwed because they have no income coming in. Now, one thing that is for certain is that during a recession, there is two things that really happen. We see a rise in unemployment. Okay, that's one of the things. And we see a decline in our GDP. Guess what? We have already seen a drop in our GDP from the first quarter of 2022. We saw this just a couple months ago. And we are very close to knowing the outlook of the second quarter in just a little over 1 month. So it's coming. We are going to know very soon whether or not we are in a recession. So we could be well on our way to a recession that could last just a couple months, or it could last 18 months, which is the typical recession. That's the average. So consider that. Remember, what is a recession? Two things have to happen. Number one, we get a negative GDP, okay? That has to be negative for 2 consecutive months, or 2 consecutive quarters, excuse me. The second thing is we have a rise in unemployment. Well, what does it mean when people are unemployed? That means they have no job, they have no income, which also means they probably can't pay their bills. So, think about it. If you are out of a job for 18 months, how difficult will that be? And I know I always bring up, well, you should have an emergency fund. But how many people have an emergency fund of 18 months? Very few, if any, right? You have to be in the upper class. Okay? You have to be an upper tier earner if you have 18 months of income just set aside in cash. Most people don't. Now, here's the reason why I want to talk about this. And this is part of the reason why you are not safe. What would you do if you were to get your hours just reduced? Let's say you work 40 hours a week. And for the sake of my math skills, I'm going to say you make $10 an hour. Okay, you make $40 or $400 every single week, working 40 hours a week. Now, obviously, there's no taxes deducted from that. There's no any other fees, nothing like that. No insurance, nothing. You get $400 a week, right? $1,600 a month. Well, what if you get your hours reduced? And instead of making $400 a week, you're only working 35 hours. So you get $350 every single week. $700 every 2 weeks, or $1,400 every month instead of $1,600. Do you think that $200 is going to make a difference? For most people, absolutely. It will make a huge difference. So, what would you do if you just got your hours reduced by just 5 hours per week? It's 20 hours a month. Most people wouldn't be able to last. But what would happen if instead of getting your hours reduced, you got your job just taken away? You were laid off. You didn't have a boss anymore. You didn't have an employer. You had no income coming in. What would you do? Most people would go look for another job. But here's the kicker. What happens if nobody's hiring? Because people are hiring now, but guess what? Everyone says we're hiring, but how many people are actually going back to work? Not a lot. There's an issue there. So there's some type of issue. What is it? We don't know. Right? But what would you do if you had to pay your expenses out of your emergency fund? Do you have an emergency fund? Is it for 18 months? Is it for 6 months? Is it for 3 months, like many people are recommending? Probably not. Most people do not have an emergency fund. Let me ask you this. How much money do you have in your emergency fund? If you feel like sharing, share it down in the comment section below. Now, these are all the things that you should be considering because most people Don't until it's too late. Most people assume that they're never going to get laid off. It's never going to happen to me. I remember when I was 18 years old, I worked for a little bit through a manufacturing company. I was a machinist. And in that time, what happened was that was during the 2008 recession, right? Or right before that. What happened is I was young. I wasn't making a lot of money. Guess what? I was safe. The workers that have been there for 20, 30 years, those are the ones that got laid off. That's the scary part, is that most Americans believe that the U.S. isn't going to go into a recession, where no one's going to get laid off, right? But that's not being realistic with what's happening right now. And understand this. The markets expect that the Fed will now be more willing to risk a recession in order to fight high inflation. Yeah, that's what we're getting. That's what happened. That's what came out yesterday. And the truth is that the Fed, they'll do this. The Federal Reserve, they're not worried about, people are going to be hurt. I understand that. What they're worried about is runaway inflation. They will push our economy into a recession in order to stop runaway inflation. And keep in mind, the Federal Reserve thought they had inflation under control, but that was actually short-lived due to the fact that we saw inflation at 8.5% in March. We saw it at 8.3% in April, and is now 8.6% for May. And also keep in mind, inflation is actually reported 1 month behind. Okay, so we are likely up over 8.6%, potentially 9% already, and we're 11 days into June. Okay, so what could you do to ensure that you are safe with your employer? This is what I want to talk about, because I know a lot of people have been asking about this, and the reason why I bring this up, just give you a quick little story. The reason why I bring this up is because I was talking to a friend earlier today. He runs an orchard, and he is very worried that we are going to go into a recession, that his orchard potentially is going to have to downsize for employees, right? And he was wondering, what should he do, right? And so that got me thinking. And obviously, I'm not giving the advice I gave him today because he was an employer. I want to talk about the employees. The first thing that experts recommend, and so I did some research on this, and this is something that I've recommended as well, even back in the beginning stage of the pandemic, was learn a new skill. Experts say that you should learn a new skill so that you could take that and take on more responsibilities for your employer. Because a person that knows multiple roles within a company is harder to let go as they can fulfill multiple duties. That's what we know, right? And that's exactly what I recommended when the whole pandemic hit back in March of 2020. The next thing that you can do, and this is something I never thought of, but experts say that remove any restrictions that you have placed on your employer. You're probably thinking, well, I don't have any restrictions. Well, here's a restriction. I remember when I used to work for somebody, I'd say, I can't work on weekends. Also can't work past 5 o'clock. Those are 2 restrictions. So if that was your stipulation is I can never work weekends, I can never work past 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock, consider removing some of those restrictions if you feel that a recession is going to happen and your employer is looking to let people go, because they could be looking at the entire employee base and be like, you know what, this guy, he can't work on the weekends. That lady, she can't work before noon on Mondays, right? Or whatever the restriction may be, or every 2 weeks that person has to have Fridays off because they got this going on. That could be an issue. So if you remove those restrictions, it would be less likely that you would be let go over somebody else because of you guys having either a restriction or you have all the restrictions. So employees want people they can count on every single day of the week. So consider doing this. Now, the last thing that is recommended, and this is something that I recommend all the time, is to find another income source. And now, I don't recommend going out and finding another job, a second job. Yeah, that makes sense. You can put more money in the bank. You feel like you're a little more secure because you're always working. What I recommend is you take on a side hustle. And this could be something as simple as walking dogs at night or on the weekend, house sitting. You could be mowing lawns or selling items on eBay or Facebook. You could even do social media marketing for small local companies, something that I used to do all the time. You can also, and this is something I did, I had a full business, is we would write articles for other people. That's something you can do as well. There's a lot of options here, but you just got to find something that works. So all these could be making you extra money, just a little bit. Even if it's an extra $200 to $500 a month, it's something. And the reason why I recommend this is because when you have another income source, you won't feel like you're trapped with an employer. And if for some reason they were to just let you go, you could always turn to your side hustle and make more money with that by spending more time there. Again, it's all about just prioritizing yourself, your future. Because I can tell you right now, working for somebody else, it may feel like it's the answer, but during a recession, you could be always worried that, I see my employer, he's calling people into the office, wonder why. You're always going to be worried, right? You're always going to be worried. So again, just understand, if you're working for somebody else, you're not 100% safe, okay? Just keep that in mind.